Good day, Treca. First of all, let me thank you for agreeing to do this video interview with me today over Zoom.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're most welcome. Let's get started by having you introduce yourself and then tell us where you grew up.
Sounds good. Okay, so I am Dr. Treca Stark Bourne. Most people call me Treca. I grew up in southern Louisiana in a town called Lutcher, Louisiana. Lutcher is a town that, along with neighboring towns in southern Louisiana, is most known for our bonfire festival on Christmas Eve, where residents build these bonfires, some in the shape of extraordinary structures atop the levee, and then we burn them on Christmas Eve. It's a really fun time.
I'm not familiar with that. I'm going to have to go look that up afterwards. So let's segue into, where did you go to college and what did you study?
Absolutely. So I completed my undergraduate study at Loyola University, New Orleans, where I studied political science with a business administration minor. One of my work study jobs, tutoring adult and traditional age students, led me to want to do work related to adult and higher ed. So after my undergraduate study, I then turned my focus away from going to law school and pursuing a legal career to completing a Master of Education in Educational Administration focused specifically on adult and higher education. And I did that at the University of New Orleans. So along with some additional continuing education related to instructional design and technology at George Mason, I did my terminal degree in higher ed and community college leadership at Morgan State University as I was working in a community college at the time.
Oh, very cool. Well, thank you. So can you share with us, so what are you doing now? What kinds of work are you doing?
Absolutely. So right now, I'm currently based out of Northern Virginia. I lead talent development efforts for what is the largest publicly funded behavioral health care provider in the Commonwealth of Virginia. That is Fairfax Falls Church Community Services Board. We serve individuals in the Fairfax County and Falls Church communities with mental illness, substance use disorders, and developmental disabilities. I also continue to have a foot in higher ed. I am an adjunct associate professor across two programs at University of Maryland Global Campus, teaching courses focused on academic and career exploration, as well as information systems management. Since I have two interests there, both in the kind of IT, the career development, talent development, and I can't make a decision, so I don't.
Well, very cool. So what kinds of work products and efforts are you involved in that you can share with our audience?
Absolutely. So my current work is rather broad. Since I started in 2019 at Fairfax Falls Church Community Service Board, my first order of business was establishing a new talent development function. So that was really, really exciting having the opportunity to do that, because most people inherit a function. They don't really get the opportunity to do that. So shortly after that, the pandemic hit. So out goes any of the strategic business plans I had made, and we pivot and we adjust in light of the pandemic. And that went amazingly well, even though we were a new team that just came together. I had just such a wonderful team. And, I had come from environments where I had worked remotely. We already had a very progressive leader who had brought us on. And so it wasn't really about, tracking time or where you work. So we were already really kind of outfitted to work from anywhere to serve our stakeholders. So we were able to pivot very swiftly with bringing a lot of our work online and virtual, because we were ready to go. We had the equipment to do so. During that time, I've done some really interesting things. I'm often tapped to do agency-wide projects along with our ongoing operations. Some of those have even included things that might not be squarely L&D, but it's neighboring to the field. So for example, I help lead a DEI culture assessment and implementation campaign in partnership with a vendor. I never work alone. I say I work with a lot of people, and what I don't know, I bring in people who do know to be a thought partner. We built a number of things, that support regulatory compliance, that support evidence-based practices related to clinical I've worked with a steering committee for a collaborative assessment and management of suicidality. That's an evidence-based practice for treating suicide, to really develop a performance-based sort of a learning experience and performance support experience that's measured to help decrease suicidality. I mean, that's a serious thing. That's what we're after. It's kind of decreasing incidents of suicide. So to do that effectively, you have to really put a robust, not just a learning experience, but those performance supports, those technical assistance, even from experts. And there's an ongoing community of practice. You know, we've partnered with IT, data analytics, who else? Informatics, to build, what do you call it, dashboards, so that we can see if, see across program areas, if utilization of the CAMs is going up, and over time, see how serious incident reports related to completions of suicide are down. And we can course correct. So now we can see this, we're tracking that data. And so if we see something in one area, we can say, what's going on over there? So what changed? So that's the type of stuff I'm really interested in. That's just a little small smidget of things, but I wanted to show the gamut of working on everything from DEI to kind of helping improve performance related to using an evidence-based practice related to treating suicide. So it's quite a range.
Yes, and very, high stakes performance, to
That's
say
right.
the least. And that's why
Absolutely.
I invited you into this series, which is titled Human Performance Technology Videos, and it's intended to help show the diversity of practitioners and their practices and their journey. So if I can segue into the next question area, can you share with us your first exposure to what I call and some others call HPT, human performance technology? Others might call it human performance improvement, which is the ends to the means of technology, or it's just evidence-based practices. We know it by a whole bunch of different names. What do you call it, and what was your first exposure to that?
Yeah, I agree. It is called many things. I've referenced it as both human performance improvement, sort of, I know that comes sort of out of the ATD world, as well as human performance technology. I was initially exposed to it in graduate school. And when I was in grad school, it was discussed, particularly in the context more so of the front end analysis, given that my program really focused on instructional design and technology. And so references were made to models like Thomas Gilbert's behavioral engineering model, Rumler and Brock's model. And to be honest, I also began to follow your work. I found that, Guy, you were in spaces where many people gather online. So you are actually who I saw talking about it a lot and advocating for it, for HPT. And so I followed you, and I've just continued to follow your work since then. And I often reference a lot of the resources you've built with my team. I'm often, because of the nature of the industries in which I've worked, sometimes we're working with novice folks, new folks who are coming in. And so I leverage a lot of those tools of many of your books, to help begin to develop them so that they are taking that human performance based and focused view. So trying to help them kind of have that mindset from the start versus just sort of producing learning experiences for the sake of learning experiences.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, man. I guess maybe some of my mentors will be happy with me, and those that are no longer with us, they'll quit visiting me in my dreams.
That's right.
So, because I'm merely channeling, so I've learned a lot from a lot of other people. And so you've mentioned Gilbert and Rumler and me, who's basically borrowed and adopted and adapted many things from those people. Are there any particular things that point our audience to, and if they're starting their journey in human performance improvement and human performance technology, what kinds of articles or books can you recall that you might mention to them?
Oh goodness, first of all, you have a whole library. I love the handbook of human performance technology. That's a big one. It's worth the investment. You have a whole library. I bought many of yours, including structured social learning, particularly because of an effort that I'm working on right now, even though I know that's a little different. And I want to say more about that later. But I have so many of your books that talk about sort of what you used to call your CAD process. I think it's instructional architecture now. Some of the titles are long, so I can't remember all.
I'm not known for brevity. No.
You have many that help with developing managers, all the way from the instructional architecture process, all the way from, I mean, and then what's beautiful in your books is that you then reference the other books where there are things that you don't go into much more detail. So you point us to that other library of books. Outside of your sort of library of books, there are many on some more on the L&D side that I appreciate to cover other aspects like learning science. And there are other books for in terms of how people learn. I have a whole library. I won't even remember all of them, but those are some of those books designing for how people learn. Books on learning science. Just an array. I do also pull from some of the ATD books, but I'm always just kind of looking and vetting just to make sure it's evidence-based or it's performance-based as well. So I would say many of those in your library that have to do with architecting the instructional process. It's very good for those in leadership positions looking to sort of start off, with a sort of I'll say engineering or structured approach to the process versus a more artful approach. I really like the idea of that. Yeah, I'm very big on your books as well as some of the others.
All right, I'm gonna have to stop you now because this is too much about me, and I didn't necessarily want that. But you mentioned some books by Nick Shackleton Jones and Julie Dirksen. Those were two.
Yes.
I can't remember who the other book author was on one of them you referenced. Yes. But let's move on because so people can follow you on LinkedIn and me and see who we might reference, and I think that would help people get started. And we're going to come back a little later in this to some of the more recent people and references that you might others too. So if you were to give us a 30-second elevator speech on what you currently do, what would that be?
Yes, I would say that I am committed to developing healthy, inclusive, and effective individuals, teams, and organizations. I really view myself as a strategic partner, a facilitator, and a consultant within my organization who realizes that the talent development function alone won't be able to address, or talent development won't be able to address all of an organization's needs and wants, but we can add more value by taking a sort of performance enablement or a career mobility focused approach that's really tied to organizational capability. That would be sort of my 30-second elevator speech.
Very good, thank you. So as a lifelong learner, where is your current focus or next focus for your own learning? And are you doing any writing about any of that you can share with us?
Absolutely. So yeah, I know this is not about you, and I will mention some others, but I have been doing a deeper dive into social learning as I am leading the establishment of a new capability academy for behavioral health specialists. And even if I know a lot about something I still like to go back to see what other books, what other literature, what other new things have come out. And so at the inception of that effort, I did purchase that structured social learning, which has been useful, along with some of the frameworks that I had come across, even in higher ed. Garrison's work on a community of inquiry, as well as some of the quality matters. There were things that I can pull from it and adapt for this experience. And, as it regards cohort-based learning specifically, or even group-based learning, as you call it, when it makes sense to do so and invest in it strategically, I like it, I love it, but I'm also a fan of well-designed knowledge articles, knowledge bases, performance support. So I don't want to give the impression that this is the only way to go. This is really for strategic things that's meeting a real business need. We have talent shortages going on in our industry. We have folks coming out of college who need to come in and be ready to go. They need to understand our processes. They need to understand our philosophy and approach to care. So this is really for new behavioral health specialists to help them ramp up swiftly, decrease their ramp up time, and get them out there serving those in the community. So that's a real strategic effort, and we're a big organization, and so we have to do it in a scalable way. I do have an article coming out later this month, specifically kind of talking about what's going on in our industry and how we're looking to address that in part through this cohort-based learning experience. And that's probably going to come out in Chief Learning Officer magazine.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. I'll be looking forward to that. And I'll be happy to share that with my network. And so hopefully help others see the approach and the benefits for taking a performance orientation. Again, this whole language issue in our field has been a big issue for me since 1979. And
yes.
I've just learned to try to really listen acutely and try to figure out what exactly are the nuanced meanings that somebody's trying to convey by some of the language. That's because our language is sloppy, as the late Joe Harless used to say. Speaking of language, then, this is a nice segue into this next question. And I've asked this because of the language issues, but is there a performance improvement or an instructional design or learning experience design term or phrase that you would like to define for us? Because perhaps you feel it's being misused or misconstrued, or you just want to put your own personal spin on it. What would you have?
I think there are lots of things I could attack with this, whether
you can do more than one.
Right, whether it's academic learning versus workplace learning, and sort of what are the aims of that. I mean, and I think that's one that's important to me because I play in both spaces. And so, the aims and the ends of academic learning is it's learning, whereas with workplace learning, we're really focused on performance and making sure that people understand that those are not one in the same. And while many practitioners like myself may come from education and into workplace learning and performance, however you reference it, that is a very important shift to make. And so that's one of the many performance consulting versus, say, performance-based instruction, and really understanding that performance consulting, that's solution agnostic. That's a really robust and strategic and planned process that you're engaging in that is very different from something like a performance-based instructional approach. And then another thing is maybe not defined, but I'd like to amplify a portion of both the definition of talent development and learning and development, which is another confusing thing for many folks as well. But the Association for Talent Development, they define talent development as the efforts that foster learning and employee development to drive organizational performance, productivity, and results. And what I think we cannot forget about the performance and results part of the definition as we partner to add value in or for our organization. And the same with learning and development. ATD references learning and development as also driving better business performance. And so again, we must continue to have that focus on producing with performance in mind and not just for the sake of creating learning experience and materials. And I know it can be fun and exciting, but we just can't forget what we're after.
Yeah, I think this is an age-old issue, the differences between education and training, as it was called back in the late 70s, early 80s, when I first got involved in all this, and looking for measured results, which is different in educational context than in a enterprise context of the language that I started using not too long ago. But that whole notion of, we need to impact performance. We should not be measuring learning activities and reporting those out as if they're as meaningful as what business impact did we have. Are we operating, performing better, faster, and cheaper? This is a stretch for some people. Now, there's no need to bash education because it's necessary. It gets us so far. And then how to apply what we may have learned in an educational context is just the next step, that last mile, so to speak, of impacting performance in somebody's workflow, or what the quality world called work streams, or way back in the day, it was just simply processes.
That's right.
We've got a whole bunch of language issues and all that stuff that's sometimes confusing for new people. But I'm glad you chose those phrases and terms, because I think it's important for new people coming in to realize there are some nuanced differences between these things.
Absolutely.
And if you're working in an enterprise, you really need to be looking at that terminal performance to see, well, how, what's the current state? What are the baseline measures for any of that, better, faster,
Yeah,
and what can we impact? And then most importantly, and you kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, is that there's more than just knowledge and skills. There's a whole
that's right.
infrastructure and system and but anyway,
Yeah.
so
And if I could just add a little
please.
bit, and I realize that, and I've seen more other people try to clarify this, but I realize a lot of people will come, not just the people who are coming in as the HPT, LNP, L&D professionals, will come with some conceptualization of learning or teaching because they've been in school and they have an experience with school-based approaches. And that's where we, as good partners, good facilitators, can help folks understand sort of the differences. And so it is kind of working together in partnership to kind of help educate up and explain. And that is our responsibility, I think, as L&D professionals. So that's all I would add. I realize that a lot of people, and even where I work, a lot of people have come from the school system, for example. Some may have worked in special education now they're behavioral health clinicians. And so even they, as I'm working on things, they're like, well, I know because I've been a teacher and that sort of thing, which is very, very valuable. But sometimes we have really good dialogues about, well, here's some of those differences between sort of what we do in an academic setting. And it makes total sense once you kind of have that dialogue and folks totally get it.
Exactly. Thank you. Okay, let's next explore some of the people who are influencing you more recently, so that audiences that are not just at the beginning of the learning and performance curves, but are a little bit up that curve. Who are you following and learning from that you might share with our audience?
Absolutely. And there's a long list, so forgive me in advance for anybody who I forget. I follow a range of folks, all the way from new to very seasoned. I love what Mallory Steele is doing in the Black and L&D group to create that space. I think that's just wonderful. Dr. Carl Binder, I've been following him for a while. Dr. Dawn Snyder. Yeah, that's right. She's Dr. Dawn Snyder. I got to get the titles right. Dr. Heidi Kirby, and I don't only follow doctors. I love what Heidi's doing in terms of creating that more in-depth focus on soundness of application of ISD. Alexander Salas for just continuously doing a historical deep dive and clarifying a lot, both directly in the L&D field as well as neighboring fields. And of course, I'm still gonna mention you, Dr. Wallace, and just so many others. I view myself as a practice leader, and I think we do need good thought leaders and content creators to put out good myth-free content to inform the work we do. And I think you are, along with those others, one of the folks who contribute to doing that in our field. And that's very important. I mean, some people are like, oh, thought leaders. I'm like, we need them, but we need them to be putting out really good content, because as a hiring manager, as an L&D practitioner, I can't do it alone. And I'm a big fan of social learning. So as folks are out there in places like LinkedIn, it's great if they can. And I do push and I tell them, because they ask me, who should I follow? Yeah. And I want to be directing them to people that's really putting out high quality content.
Right. I mean, there's a lot of people out there that I've always been kind of uncomfortable with the thought leader label, because I always thought I was a thought follower and stealer and thief. But that's how we learn from others, and I think it's important that we help others and point the way. Now, there's many others beyond what you or I could list, name, or even know about, that are adding value to the profession. And I think people just need to get on that bandwagon where they start following people and perhaps even interacting with them, because I think that helps to have a two-way exchange with people. Absolutely. And I also forgot, and because I mentioned one of his books, Dr. Clark Quinn, as well, I also follow Miriam Nealon. I want to get the names right, and make sure I'm pronouncing them correctly. But there's just lots of great people just doing really great work out there. And so forgive me again, I follow a lot more of you.
Forgive me for not mentioning all your names.
Well, that's a good list. We don't need to overwhelm people with who to follow and all that, so they can start climbing that curve now. Treca, thank you so much for agreeing to participate with me in this interview. And my final question for you is, do you have any parting words of wisdom or guidance for our audience, especially those that are new to the field related to all things performance improvement?
Sure. So I would say that it's easy to kind of get caught up in focusing primarily on responding to those one-off or ad hoc training requests and distributing training, especially when you are in a setting that's asking that of you. But for greater impact, we must find ways to approach the work with a focus on performance and organizational capability. That would be my parting words.
Thank you again so much for sharing with us today. Have a great day.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome.